Snow was falling in Chicago when my world collapsed. I stood in Richard's marble bathroom, trembling hands clutching the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines, clear, undeniable. My heart raced between fear and hope. Richard Blackwood wasn't just my boyfriend of 2 years. He was the heir to Blackwood Industries, son of one of Chicago's most powerful families, and a man with political ambitions he made no effort to hide. "Richard," I called, stepping out of the bathroom, "we need to talk." He sat on the leather couch, reviewing some important contract. I held up the test with a nervous smile. For a moment, as his eyes focused on the small object in my hand, I imagined a life together, a family. It was a brief moment. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice as cold as the wind lashing against the windows of the 35th floor. "I'm pregnant," I confirmed, still holding on to a fragment of hope. Richard stood, adjusting the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. "Sarah, let's be realistic. You were never more than a temporary amusement, and a baby certainly won't change that." His words hit me like a slap. "Temporary amusement? We've been together for 2 years, Richard. And it was fun, but I have a political career ahead of me, the company board to take over. Did you really think you were part of that future?" He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out his checkbook. "Let's resolve this like adults." I watched in shock as he deliberately wrote a check, signed it with his Mont Blanc pen, and slid it across the coffee table toward me. $5,000, he said, like someone offering a waiter a tip. "Get rid of the problem or use this to disappear. Frankly, I don't care which option you choose, as long as you keep me out of it." "Richard, it's our child," I whispered, incredulous. He laughed, a cruel sound I'd never heard from him before. "Sarah, let's be honest. You have no education beyond that community college diploma, no connections, nothing to offer beyond a pretty face. In 5 years, you'll be nothing. You would never be a real Blackwood, just a burden on my political career." That night, I drove through heavy snow, tears blurring my vision, to my sister Melissa's small apartment in Milwaukee. She opened the door, saw my state, and simply asked, "What did he do?" In the weeks that followed, Melissa made it clear that her tiny apartment couldn't accommodate a baby. "You need to be realistic, Sarah," she said while drinking her breakfast coffee. "Richard is right about one thing. What do you have to offer a child?" 6 weeks after leaving Chicago, I discovered I was expecting twins. I sat in the bathroom of a women's shelter on the outskirts of Detroit, where I'd gone when the money ran low. I fell to my knees on the cold floor, holding the ultrasound showing 2 tiny beating hearts. "2 girls," the social worker whispered. "You have options, you know." But I already knew my answer. "They're my daughters. They're all I have now." I secured 3 jobs: waitressing during the day, pharmacy cashier at night, and data entry on weekends. I slept about 4 hours a night, my feet swollen and my back aching as the pregnancy progressed. I saved every possible penny. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep in the small shelter room, Richard's words echoing, "You'll be nothing." But then I'd feel my daughters moving inside me, and something changed. "He's wrong," I whispered to my belly one night. "I'll prove he's wrong about everything." The turning point came when, in my 8th month of pregnancy, I served coffee to a woman at the restaurant. She was reviewing programming code on her laptop. "Is that an inventory management system?" I asked as I refilled her cup. She looked at me, surprised. "You understand coding?" 2-year technical course in information systems, I replied. Never finished my bachelor's, but I learned enough to recognize SQL when I see it. Janet Morris owned a small technology solutions company. She offered me a part-time internship I could do remotely after the twins were born. It didn't pay much, but it was a start in the tech sector. When Olivia and Emma were born, I looked at their perfect little faces and made a solemn promise. I'm going to build an empire for you. One day, Richard Blackwood will swallow every word he said about us. As I drove away from Milwaukee with just one suitcase in the trunk and $5,000 hidden in the lining of my coat, I couldn't imagine that in 15 years I would be worth billions, and Richard Blackwood would be begging for my attention. 6 weeks after leaving Chicago, I sat on the cold tile floor of a women's shelter bathroom in Detroit, staring at the ultrasound image in my trembling hands. 2 distinct shapes, 2 tiny fluttering hearts. 2 girls, the shelter's volunteer social worker whispered, kneeling beside me. Her hand rested gently on my shoulder, her voice softening as she added, "You have options, you know. I traced the outlines of my daughters with my fingertip, these 2 miracles forming inside me despite everything. "They're my daughters," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "They're all I have now." That night, I curled up on the thin mattress in my assigned room, staring at water stains on the ceiling. $5,000 had seemed like so much money when I'd driven away from Chicago. Now, with twins on the way and only 3 months' worth of rent paid at this shelter, the reality of my situation was crushing. The next morning, I was first in line at the local diner, the want ads circled in red ink. "You're hired," said the manager at Sonny's Diner, eyeing my growing belly skeptically. "But once you can't fit between the tables anymore, you're on your own." By evening, I'd secured a position as a pharmacy cashier at the 24-hour Walgreens. The weekend data entry job came 2 days later. 3 jobs, barely enough to survive, but I took them all. My routine became brutal. Waitressing from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Home for a 1-hour nap. Pharmacy work from 4 until midnight. Weekends spent hunched over spreadsheets, entering endless strings of numbers for a manufacturing company. My feet swelled inside the cheap sneakers I'd bought at a thrift store. My back ached constantly as my pregnancy advanced. There were nights when I could barely climb the stairs to my room, when the thought of waking up and doing it all again seemed impossible. "You don't have to do this," the shelter director told me one evening, finding me crying in the communal kitchen at 3 in the morning. "There are services, adoption options." "No," I cut her off, wiping my tears. "These are my daughters. I'm keeping them." As my 7th month began, I started setting aside money in a jar labeled Baby Fund. $5 here, 10 there, whatever I could spare after rent and food. It wasn't much, but watching it grow gave me purpose. There were nights when Richard's words echoed in my head as I stared at the ceiling. "You'll be nothing in 5 years." In those darkest moments, I'd place my hands on my swollen belly, feeling my daughters move. "He's wrong," I whispered to them one particularly difficult night. "I'm going to prove he's wrong about everything." In my 8th month, with my feet so swollen I could barely stand, I served coffee to a woman who sat alone at Sonny's, intensely focused on her laptop screen. "Is that an inventory management system?" I asked as I refilled her cup, recognizing the SQL queries on her screen. She looked up, clearly surprised. "You understand coding?" I shrugged, balancing the coffee pot on my hip. 2-year technical course in information systems. Never finished my bachelor's, but I learned enough to recognize SQL when I see it. Her name was Janet Morris, owner of a small tech solutions company specializing in inventory systems for retail businesses. We talked for nearly an hour during her lunch break, and by the time she left, she'd offered me a part-time remote internship I could start after the twins were born. "It doesn't pay much," she warned, handing me her business card. "But it would keep your skills fresh, and who knows where it might lead." 2 weeks later, I went into labor during my shift at Walgreens. The manager called an ambulance while customers stared at the heavily pregnant woman leaning against the counter, breathing through contractions. 17 hours later, I held Olivia and Emma for the first time. Two perfect tiny beings with wisps of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look straight through me. In that sterile hospital room, with no family beside me and only a kind nurse to witness the moment, I made them a solemn promise. "I'm going to build an empire for you," I whispered, kissing each of their foreheads. "One day, Richard Blackwood will swallow every word he said about us." When Olivia and Emma were born in a cold public hospital delivery room, I looked at their perfect little faces and swore, "I'm going to build an empire for you, and one day Richard Blackwood will swallow every word he said about us," without imagining how completely this promise would become reality. The first 2 years with the twins tested every fiber of my being. Our apartment, a single room with peeling wallpaper in Detroit's East Side, smelled perpetually of mildew and the neighbors' cigarettes. At night, I'd set up a makeshift bed from cardboard boxes lined with blankets, tucking Olivia and Emma inside while I hunched over Janet's borrowed laptop. "Just a few more hours, girls," I'd whisper when one would stir. "Mommy needs to finish this code." The remote work for Janet's company paid just enough to supplement my dwindling savings, but nowhere near enough for proper childcare or a better apartment. When both girls caught bronchitis from the black mold growing behind our radiator, I spent 3 sleepless nights holding them upright so they could breathe, coding with one hand while balancing a baby on my shoulder. "You look like hell, Sarah," Janet said during our weekly video check-in, her voice softened with concern. "Are you sleeping at all?" "Enough," I lied, adjusting Emma on my lap while Olivia napped in her cardboard crib. "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. The twins frequently fell ill from our living conditions. The building's heating failed for 2 weeks in January, forcing us to sleep in a single bed, my body curled around theirs for warmth. But in those darkest moments, watching their perfect little faces in sleep, I felt a determination hardening within me like steel being forged. Despite everything, I found myself thriving at the inventory management systems that formed Janet's company's backbone. Late at night, after the twins finally slept, I'd experiment with code improvements, creating more efficient algorithms that Janet hadn't considered. "This optimization you sent last night," Janet said during one call. "It reduced processing time by 40%. Where did you learn to code like this?" "Just something I've been playing with," I replied, bouncing a fussy Olivia. "I think we could rebuild the entire system from scratch, make it more scalable." In those stolen hours between midnight and dawn, I began developing my own inventory system, sleeker, more intuitive, and adaptable to businesses of any size. It became my secret project, my potential ticket out of poverty. My workspace consisted of a wobbly card table pushed against the apartment's only window, where the streetlight provided extra illumination when I couldn't afford to run the lamp all night. The twins' toys, mostly donated items from the shelter, scattered across the stained carpet, testament to how intertwined my work and motherhood had become. One morning, I opened my email to find a message from Melissa, the first contact since I'd left Milwaukee. "Sarah, I've lost my job. Rent is due next week. I'm desperate. Please help if you can. M." I stared at the screen, remembering her words in Milwaukee. "Richard is right about one thing. What do you have to offer a child?" Opening my pathetic excuse for a savings account, I looked at the balance, $437.12, barely enough for next month's rent. After a moment's hesitation, I transferred $200 to her account. That night, watching the twins sleep, their tiny chests rising and falling in unison, I made them another promise. One day, we'll never have to choose between eating well and helping someone. One day, we'll have enough for everyone. As spring arrived, both girls caught another respiratory infection. The pediatrician at the free clinic looked at me with barely concealed judgment. "These recurrent infections aren't normal, Ms. Emerson. Your living conditions—" "I know," I cut her off, fighting tears. "I'm working on it." That evening, after putting the twins to bed, I emailed Janet my completed prototype of the new inventory system. "This is revolutionary," she called the next morning. "Where did you find time to build this?" "Between midnight feedings," I laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Do you think it has potential?" "Potential? Sarah, this could transform how small businesses handle inventory. We need to talk about expanding your role." That night, I allowed myself a rare luxury, a celebratory pint of ice cream shared with the twins, who squealed at the cold sweetness on their tongues. "Things are going to get better," I promised them, wiping chocolate from Olivia's chin. "Mommy's building something important." Looking at their innocent faces, I silently added, "And one day, we'll never again have to wonder where our next meal is coming from." While I worked on the lines of code that would one day become the system that revolutionized global inventory management, I couldn't imagine that within 5 years I would be CEO of my own company, proving Richard wrong in his timeline. I would be somebody much sooner than he predicted. 3 years after the birth of the twins, Janet invited me to her lakeside home, sunlight dancing across the water visible through her panoramic windows. The contrast with my cramped apartment was stark. "I'm retiring, Sarah," she said, pouring me tea in a delicate china cup. "And I want you to take over the company." I nearly spilled the hot liquid. "Janet, I'm a single mother of 3-year-old twins. How could I possibly run a company?" "The inventory system you developed has become our flagship product. The company's future is your creation." She slid a folder across her glass coffee table. "I'm offering you a buy-in plan. You can pay me as the company grows." I stared at the documents, heart racing. "I don't know if I can do this." "I believe in you more than you believe in yourself," Janet said, her expression serious. "And that's saying something." 2 weeks later, I walked into my first meeting as CEO of the newly renamed Emerson Tech Solutions, honoring my mother's maiden name. The conference room fell silent as I entered, 7 employees eyeing me with various degrees of skepticism. "Gentlemen," I said, setting my worn briefcase on the table, "let's discuss our 5-year growth strategy." The oldest man in the room smirked. "Sweetheart, are you sure you want to jump right into the deep end? Perhaps we should start with something simpler." I smiled tightly. "Mr. Wilson, I built the system that generates 80% of this company's revenue. I believe I can handle discussing its future." That night, I told the twins we were moving. "Mommy has a surprise. We're going to a new home with rooms just for you." Olivia and Emma raced through our new apartment the following weekend, their excited squeals echoing off walls that didn't share neighbors. "This is all ours?" Emma asked, eyes wide at the space. "All ours," I confirmed, watching them explore the small but clean 2-bedroom unit in a safer neighborhood. That night, after tucking them into their very first real beds, I sat on our tiny balcony, looking at Detroit's lights, allowing myself to dream bigger than survival for the first time. The early months of leadership tested me constantly. Clients would ask to speak to the technical person when I'd walk into meetings, their faces revealing surprise when I'd launch into detailed explanations of our system architecture. "You don't look like a programmer," one client commented after I'd walked him through our database structure. "And what does a programmer look like?" I asked pleasantly, closing the sale despite his condescension. My office door proudly displayed Emerson Tech Solutions, though the space was modest, just large enough for my desk, a small conference table, and a play area where the twins could stay when childcare arrangements fell through. More than once, I conducted client calls with Olivia coloring quietly under my desk. 6 months into my leadership, I developed a cloud-based extension that tripled our processing capacity. The sales team was ecstatic, booking demonstrations with businesses previously considered too large for our solutions. One evening, browsing through a magazine stand, I froze at the sight of Richard's face on the cover of Fortune. "Blackwood heir takes empire's helm," the headline declared. The article praised his natural business acumen and born leadership. I purchased the magazine, studying his immaculate appearance in his tailored suit, his confident smile revealing nothing of the cruelty I'd witnessed. Inside, I found a small mention of Emerson Tech in the promising startups section, a single paragraph acknowledging our innovative approach to inventory management. In my office the next morning, I placed the magazine in my desk drawer and returned to work, the contrast between his inherited empire and my bootstrapped company fueling my determination rather than discouraging it. "Mom, are we rich now?" Olivia asked one evening as I prepared dinner in our modest kitchen. I smiled, stirring pasta sauce. "Not yet, sweetheart, but we're building something important." "Something bigger than that man's company?" she asked, pointing to the Fortune magazine I'd left on the counter. I knelt to her level. "Someday, yes, and we're going to build it ourselves, brick by brick." As I closed the drawer with Richard's image on the Fortune cover, I couldn't predict that in just 7 years it would be me on that same magazine's cover, with a headline that would make Richard Blackwood choke on his morning coffee. "The Tech Queen: How Sarah Emerson Revolutionized Data Management." As I closed the drawer with Richard's image on the Fortune cover, a sharp ring cut through my office. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Emerson, the school is calling about Olivia." 20 minutes later, I rushed into the principal's office to find my 5-year-old daughter hunched over a math workbook while the school counselor watched with barely concealed amazement. "Mrs. Emerson," the principal said, "Olivia solved these second-grade math problems during free time. We believe she needs more advanced placement." 2 weeks later, both twins sat in a sterile office while educational psychologists administered tests. I twisted my simple watch band, the only accessory I could afford, as we waited for results. "Your daughters have exceptional cognitive abilities," the lead psychologist explained. "IQs well above the gifted range. They would benefit from specialized education." That night, I researched schools for gifted children while the twins slept. The tuition figures made my stomach clench, but I added them to my growing list of goals. The following month brought our company's first major challenge. My technical director burst into my office, face pale. "CEO, we found a product nearly identical to ours on the market. They've copied our interface." My team gathered in the conference room, panic spreading like wildfire. "They'll undercut us," someone moaned. "We're finished," another predicted. I stood at the head of the table. "No, we're not. We're going to create something so revolutionary they'll spend years trying to catch up." For the next 3 weeks, I survived on 3 hours of sleep nightly. When Emma developed a fever during our critical development phase, I brought her to the office, creating a makeshift bed from cushions while I coded. "Why don't you ever come to Mother-Daughter Day like other moms?" Olivia asked one evening, her voice small. I knelt before her, guilt washing through me. "Mommy's building something important for our future, but I promised to make the next one." I missed Emma's dance recital when negotiations with a major client ran long. That night, I watched a shaky video on my phone, tears streaming down my face as my daughter twirled in a costume I'd helped sew at midnight the week before. The midnight oil burned consistently in my office. Often the twins slept on the sofa while I conducted late-night calls with international clients, my voice dropping to a whisper when they stirred. 6 weeks after discovering the competitor's copy, we launched our version 2.0. The response was immediate. Clients calling with excitement about features our competitor couldn't match. "You transformed a threat into an opportunity," said David, the intellectual property attorney I'd hired to protect our innovations. His eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than necessary. That's rare. Over coffee after our meeting, his gaze grew softer. "Would it be purely professional if I invited you to dinner?" I stirred my coffee, studying him, attractive, intelligent, kind, and clearly interested, yet I hesitated. "I have twin daughters and a company. I don't have space for anything else right now." That evening, I picked up the girls from school, holding them tighter than usual. "Mom, you're squishing us," Emma giggled. "Sorry," I said, "not sorry at all. I just love you two so much." Later that night, I stood at our apartment window, looking at Detroit's skyline. 5 years ago, I'd been pregnant and abandoned, sleeping in a shelter. Now I was CEO of a growing tech company with 25 employees. My daughters were thriving, their brilliance already evident. I thought briefly of David's dinner invitation, of the warmth in his eyes. Perhaps someday, but not yet. My priorities were clear, my daughters and the empire I was building for them. The twins' laughter echoed from their bedroom, where they were reading well beyond their grade level. I smiled, thinking of how Richard had underestimated not only me, but the amazing daughters he'd rejected. As I observed my 5-year-old daughters sleeping, their brilliant minds already dreaming of possibilities I couldn't yet imagine, I had no idea that in 10 years we would attend an event where Richard Blackwood would not only recognize me, but would see in our daughters the legacy he had rejected. As I observed my 5-year-old daughters sleeping, I couldn't imagine the journey that awaited us over the next 3 years. The transformation would be extraordinary. 8 years after Richard's abandonment, I stood at the edge of the Tech Forward conference stage in San Francisco, watching attendees file into the auditorium. My presentation on Emerson Tech's revolutionary cloud-based inventory system was the most anticipated of the morning session. "Ms. Emerson, we're ready for you," the event coordinator whispered, adjusting my microphone. Stepping onto the stage, I surveyed the packed room. 300 tech professionals, investors, and journalists, all here to hear me speak. My company now employed 300 people across 3 cities, a far cry from the 7 employees I'd inherited from Janet. The applause following my presentation was thunderous. As I made my way through the conference hall afterward, I overheard snippets of conversation. "Sarah Emerson is revolutionizing the entire inventory management space. Emerson Tech came out of nowhere. 300% growth in 2 years. I smiled, accepting congratulations from CEOs who wouldn't have acknowledged my existence 3 years earlier. My phone buzzed with a notification. TechCrunch had published their feature, Emerson Tech, the startup that became a giant in less than a decade. Turning a corner toward the refreshment area, I froze. Across the crowded hall, a familiar face caught my eye. Melissa. My sister stood behind a public relations company booth, her gaze suddenly locking with mine. Time seemed to slow as I approached her station. 8 years had changed us both. Her hair now highlighted with expensive streaks, her posture stiffer than I remembered. Sarah, her eyes widened, her arms extending for an awkward hug. My God, you look different. I accepted her embrace stiffly. It's been a while. So, she gestured vaguely, you have a small tech company? I smiled tightly. Emerson Tech, 300 employees, offices in Detroit, Chicago, and Boston. Oh, her expression flickered. That's impressive. I noticed the name badge on her lapel. Blackwood PR initiatives? She nodded, fidgeting with her bracelet. I'm working on the exploratory committee for Richard Blackwood's senatorial campaign. Illinois seat. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. Interesting. I wish you both luck. Later in my hotel suite, I searched Richard's name online. The screen filled with results. Chief Operating Officer of Blackwood Industries, Chamber of Commerce board member, listed among Chicago's most eligible bachelors, despite being 40 years old. My phone chimed with an email notification. The CEO of Tech Giant, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world, wanted to discuss acquisition possibilities. Their opening offer, $75 million. I called my CFO immediately. Sarah, this is life-changing money, she said. You and the girls would be set for life. That night, I stood in the doorway of the hotel bedroom where my daughters slept. At 8 years old, they were already extraordinary. Olivia had won her first regional mathematics competition last month. Emma's science project on algorithmic weather prediction had earned national recognition. The next morning over breakfast, Olivia looked up from her book. Mom, why don't we ever talk about our father? The question I'd been anticipating for years finally arrived. Emma set down her orange juice, adding, Nora has 2 dads. Some kids don't have a dad. Do we have one somewhere? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Yes, you have a biological father. When you're a little older, I'll tell you the whole story. As I drafted my response declining Tech Giant's $75 million offer that evening, I knew I was making the right choice. I wasn't building Emerson Tech to sell it. I was building a legacy that would someday eclipse Blackwood Industries. While I wrote my response declining the $75 million, determined to build something truly transformative, I didn't imagine this decision would put me on a collision course with Richard Blackwood in just 5 years, when our worlds would collide in a way no money could buy. While I wrote my response declining the $75 million, a new email notification appeared in my inbox. Forbes magazine wanted to interview me for their 40 Most Influential Women in America issue. 10 years after Richard's abandonment, life had become nearly unrecognizable. Mom, look at these acceptance rates, Olivia called from the living room of our spacious Detroit home, her laptop open to college statistics. At just 10 years old, my daughters were already researching universities. I smiled, remembering our tiny shelter room. Now, we lived in an elegant 5-bedroom house in Grosse Pointe, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake St. Clair. My company had grown exponentially, now valued in the hundreds of millions, with 1,500 employees globally. Emma, Olivia, we need to leave in 20 minutes for the competition, I called, slipping on my Louboutin heels, a small luxury I'd allowed myself after our last quarter's record-breaking profits. The National Mathematics Competition was being held at the University of Michigan. As we entered the auditorium, I caught whispers from other parents. That's Sarah Emerson, the tech CEO. We took our seats just as they announced Olivia's name. My heart swelled watching my daughter confidently approach the whiteboard, solving complex equations that challenged even university professors. 2 days later, Emma demonstrated her latest algorithm to MIT researchers via video conference. At 10, she'd developed a predictive model that caught the attention of climate scientists. Your daughters are extraordinary, Miss Emerson, the lead researcher commented. Their cognitive abilities are remarkable. They take after their mother, my CFO remarked during our quarterly board meeting. Brilliant, determined, unstoppable. Despite our success, I insisted the girls remain grounded. Every month, we volunteered at a women's shelter similar to the one that once housed us. Mom, why do we always volunteer here specifically? Emma asked one Saturday as we sorted donated clothes. Because everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, I answered, remembering my own journey from those desperate rooms. When the Forbes magazine arrived by courier, the girls squealed seeing my face on the cover. "Mom, you're famous!" Olivia exclaimed, jumping excitedly. The profile highlighted my journey from single mother with nothing to potential billionaire CEO. They'd done their research, mentioning my humble beginnings, though I'd carefully omitted Richard's name from my official biography. That evening, as I reviewed acquisition proposals, an email appeared that made my blood run cold. The sender, Richard Blackwood. "Sarah, impressive trajectory. Would like to reconnect." Richard Blackwood, COO, Blackwood Industries. My finger hovered over the delete button. After 10 years of silence, now he wanted to reconnect? A quick search revealed he was indeed running for Senate in Illinois, currently leading in polls. I clicked delete without responding, but sleep eluded me that night. Would our paths inevitably cross now that I'd reached his level of influence? How would I prepare my daughters for that possibility? The next morning, I retrieved every article written about my success from my office files, carefully placing them in a leather portfolio. Someday, when my daughters were ready, they would know the complete story of their father's rejection and our subsequent rise. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Emma asked, finding me organizing the clippings. Always perceptive, she sensed my distraction. "Everything's perfect," I assured her, closing the folder. As the Emerson Tech prepared for its IPO, analysts projected our valuation at over $350 million. Richard's email felt like a shadow from the past, trying to touch our bright future. "Ms. Emerson, the investment bankers are waiting in the conference room," my assistant announced. I straightened my Armani blazer, tucked the portfolio into my desk drawer, and headed to the meeting that would take us to the next level. Whatever Richard's motives, they were irrelevant to our story now. While closing the folder containing every article about my growing success, I knew I wasn't just preserving evidence for my daughters. I was building a case for the inevitable day when Richard Blackwood would try to enter our lives, without imagining that day would arrive on a much more public stage than I could predict. While closing the folder containing every article about my growing success, I felt a strange premonition. 5 years later, that feeling would prove prophetic as I stood in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, adjusting my Tiffany bracelets. "Senator Harris, the Liberty Awards ceremony begins in 15 minutes, my assistant whispered, handing me the final draft of my acceptance speech. 15 years had passed since that snowy Chicago night. Now, I divided my time between leading Emerson Tech, valued at $2.3 billion, and my recently secured Senate seat representing New York. The transformation was complete, from abandoned pregnant woman to one of the most powerful figures in American business and politics. "Mom, I'm nervous about this speech," Olivia confessed, adjusting her navy blue dress that perfectly complemented her eyes unmistakably like her father's, though she didn't know it. "You'll be amazing," I reassured her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Stanford will be lucky to have both of you next fall." My daughters, now 15, were prodigies. Olivia in applied mathematics, Emma in data science. Both had been accepted early to Stanford, achievements that filled me with indescribable pride. They had grown up watching their mother build an empire from nothing, starting in a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit, then a modest suburban home, and finally our Manhattan penthouse after Emerson Tech went public 5 years ago. "Mom, who is that man who keeps staring at you?" Emma asked, always observant, discreetly pointing across the ballroom. I didn't need to look. I felt his presence before turning my head. Richard Blackwood, now senator from Illinois, stood 20 meters away, surrounded by aides. Older, with silver streaks at his temples, but still carrying that arrogant posture that had once fascinated me. And beside him, Smiling radiantly in a designer dress, stood my sister Melissa, his communications director and, judging by the ring on her finger, apparently his fiancée. My blood froze in my veins. In 15 years, we had never crossed paths. I had changed my surname from Harris to Emerson, my mother's maiden name, when I founded my company. In politics, I was known as Senator Harris, but in the business world, I was Sarah Emerson. Richard clearly hadn't made the connection until now. "Nobody important," I answered my daughters, turning my back to him. "Let's prepare. We're sharing a table with the Commerce Secretary tonight." As I walked through the ballroom, I felt the stares. Not vanity, just reality of who I had become. Every sacrifice had been worth it. The nights studying after the girls fell asleep, the weekends working while other mothers took their children to parks, the relationships I'd sacrificed because building my empire and raising my daughters consumed all my energy. "Senator Harris," the presenter approached, "everyone wants to know if you'll accept the Commerce Secretary nomination in the next administration." I smiled politely. "I'm considering all options to best serve our country." That's when I felt a shift in the atmosphere. Richard had finally recognized me. I could feel his fixed gaze on my back, then on my daughters, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. 15 years, twins. The calculations were simple even for someone who once considered me disposable. "Sarah?" The voice was familiar even after 15 years. I turned slowly, maintaining a neutral expression, though my heart was hammering against my chest. "Senator Blackwood," I replied with a polite nod. "What a surprise to see you here." His eyes traveled quickly from my face to my daughters and back. Understanding settled on his expression like a storm forming. "You're Senator Harris?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Sarah Harris?" "Emerson," I corrected. "Sarah Emerson in the business world, Harris in politics." He appeared momentarily speechless, a state I had never seen Richard Blackwood experience before. "My daughters," I introduced with calculated calm. "Olivia and Emma Emerson." The girls, accustomed to high-profile events, extended their hands politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Senator," Olivia said, with the confidence of someone who had grown up in boardrooms and political events. As I observed the recognition settling in Richard's eyes, I felt 15 years of history converging for this explosive moment, without knowing that my acceptance speech in a few minutes would forever change the power balance between us. As I observed the recognition settling in Richard's eyes, the moment seemed to stretch into eternity. The background noise of the gala faded as our bubble of tension expanded. "Richard?" Melissa appeared at his side, her practiced smile faltering when she recognized me. "Sarah? My God, how long has it been?" 15 years, I replied coolly. "Since that night in Milwaukee when you told me your apartment was too small for a baby." I paused deliberately. Or two, as I discovered later. The ballroom around us continued its elegant dance of conversation and champagne toasts, but our small circle remained frozen in time. Richard finally regained his composure, straightening his custom tuxedo jacket. "You've done well," he said, as if bestowing a difficult compliment. "I didn't expect to see you at an event like this." "You mean the Liberty Award I'm receiving tonight?" I asked, my tone deliberately light. "Or the fact that my company surpassed Blackwood Industries in market value last quarter?" I watched shock register in his eyes. He hadn't known this. Why would he? Richard had always been more concerned with his political image than with the details of his family empire. "The Emerson Tech," he murmured. "That's your company?" "Built from scratch," I confirmed. "Without inheritance, without family connections, without anything to offer except a pretty face. Isn't that how you phrased it?" Melissa paled visibly. Richard, perhaps we should find our seats. You already knew each other? Emma asked, her analytical mind connecting dots as always. The moment I had both dreaded and anticipated had finally arrived. I looked at my daughters, these brilliant young women I had raised alone, and decided they deserved the truth. Senator Blackwood and I knew each other long ago in Chicago, I explained calmly. Actually, he's your biological father. The ballroom seemed to fall silent, though I knew it was just my perception. Richard choked on the champagne he had just sipped. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, he suggested, his voice strained. Why? I challenged. You didn't want to be part of their lives for 15 years. You were quite clear when you handed me a $5,000 check and told me to solve the problem. Your exact words, if memory serves. Olivia and Emma stood perfectly still, processing the information with expressions that shifted between shock and an analytical calm they had inherited from me. Senator Blackwood, Olivia finally said, her voice controlled. I'm Olivia Emerson. This is my sister Emma. It's interesting to finally meet the man who considered our existence a problem to be eliminated. Richard seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. That was a long time ago. I was young, impulsive. You were 32 and vice president of Blackwood Industries, I corrected. Hardly an impulsive teenager. The presenter approached again, oblivious to the tension. Senator Harris, we need you on stage in 5 minutes. I'll be there, I confirmed with a professional smile before turning my attention back to Richard. It was enlightening to see you again, Senator. Sarah, he tried, his voice softer now. Could we talk afterwards? There's so much to discuss. Actually, there isn't, I replied. My daughters and I have a complete life. Nothing is missing. When I took the stage to accept my award, I saw Richard and Melissa seated at a nearby table. He looked stunned, like a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse 15 years ago and was now watching it cross the finish line without him. At the microphone, I thanked those who had supported me over the years. I spoke about building something from nothing, about perseverance and vision. And then, looking directly at Richard, I added, 15 years ago, someone told me I had nothing to offer beyond a pretty face, that in 5 years I would be nothing. I paused. Blackwood Industries is worth $750 million today. Impressive. But half of that was lost in recent years, while Emerson Tech surpassed $2.3 billion this quarter, built by a woman with nothing to offer. The hall erupted in applause, not understanding the private message in my words. But Richard understood. I could see it in his eyes. The hall erupted in applause as I stepped away from the podium, my words hanging in the air like perfectly aimed arrows. I could feel Richard's eyes following me as I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from dignitaries and business leaders who had no idea of the personal victory I had just claimed. I knew he would find me. Men like Richard Blackwood always believe they're entitled to the final word. 20 minutes later, I stood alone in the hotel's garden terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief from the stuffy ballroom. I sensed his presence before I heard his footsteps on the stone path. Impressive speech, Richard said, approaching cautiously. Congratulations on your success. Thank you, I replied simply, not turning fully to face him. He moved closer, his expensive cologne, still the same brand after all these years, briefly triggering unwanted memories. Sarah, about the past. I made a mistake. Yes, you did, I agreed, finally meeting his gaze. But it was the best gift you could have given me. Confusion crossed his face. What do you mean? I smiled genuinely. If you had stayed with me, I would have become Richard Blackwood's wife. I would have lived in your shadow, probably organizing charity events and dinners for your political associates. I shrugged. Instead, I built something of my own, something bigger than the Blackwood empire will ever be. We could have been great together, Sarah, he attempted, that old arrogance returning to his voice. I laughed, a real, honest laugh. No, Richard, I became great despite you, and my daughters carry my surname because your rejection was the gift that freed me to build something far greater than your name or your legacy. I sensed movement behind us. Olivia and Emma approached, flanking me protectively like guardian angels in designer dresses. I'd like to get to know them, Richard said, looking at my daughters with newfound interest, to learn who they are. You can read about them in last month's New York Times, I replied. The article about young prodigies accepted early to Stanford, or in Scientific American last year, where Emma's algorithm was the cover feature. Richard appeared genuinely impressed. You both seem extraordinary. They are, I confirmed, and they didn't need a penny of yours to become so. Perhaps we could have dinner, he suggested, the four of us, to talk. Emma, always direct, responded, For what purpose? We have a complete life, an extraordinary mother. We're not looking for a father now. Especially one who considered our existence inconvenient, Olivia added. Richard glanced toward Melissa, who watched our interaction from a distance. And your sister? Have you reconciled? We're not close, I answered honestly, but I wish her all happiness with you. His next words surprised me. She's not you, Sarah. She never was. For a moment, I saw vulnerability in Richard Blackwood, the genuine regret of a man who realizes, too late, what he discarded. Richard, I said softly, you lost the right to have these feelings for me 15 years ago. I've built an entire life without you. My daughters grew up not needing you. My empire was raised without your name or money. What about revenge? He asked. That comment about Blackwood Industries. It wasn't revenge, I corrected. It was a fact. I don't need revenge, Richard. Revenge implies you still matter to me. But the truth is, I moved past you a long time ago. The next morning, as we had breakfast in our penthouse, Emma showed me the news on her tablet. Page 6 of the New York Post featured a photo of Richard alone leaving the plaza. The headline mentioned the sudden ending of his engagement to Melissa. There were also rumors about a Senate Ethics Committee investigation into irregularities in his campaigns. Do you think he'll try to contact us again? Olivia asked. Probably, I answered honestly. Men like Richard don't easily accept rejection. And how will we handle that? Emma questioned. I looked at my daughters, these extraordinary young women who were my greatest legacy, with dignity and firmness. We're not closing the door out of malice or revenge, but because our life is complete without him. 3 hours later, I boarded the Emerson Tech private jet with my daughters bound for Washington. The president had personally called this morning. The Commerce Secretary nomination was officially on the table. As the plane took off, I looked through the window at Manhattan shrinking below us. Somewhere down there, Richard Blackwood was facing the consequences of his past choices. But me? I was flying higher than he ever imagined I could.